looked like.
We have a female adult who was found in the 1600 block of West Spencer Street at about...
The Betty Rolfe story. Unpick Kitty, kidnap, a murder, violence, investigate. They all came together in our story today. A story that had puzzled the officers of the state of Wisconsin, which continued to be investigated from 1988 to 2001. And no clear results were found and were placed among the forgotten files. But the tip of a thread was found in 2019 following the development of science. According to DNA deduction technology, and over time, a final solution to the long-solved mystery was found in 2022. Don't forget to subscribe to Dark Matters channel and press the bell button. Betty Rolfe, a name that was known in Little Port Williams as belonging to a young girl full of energy, hardworking, loving, kind, born in 1928 in Port Williams and nurtured by a special family that loves her very much. It is noteworthy that in her youth she encountered a handsome young man named Charles, decided to propose to marry a woman who he thought would summarize for him the meaning of true love. Out of her love for him, she couldn't hide her joy and openly agreed to his request. And indeed, they got married and traveled and settled in the state of Appleton and had 5 children who had summed up their love. As we mentioned earlier, Betty is good for her work. As soon as she settled down, she started looking for work and she succeeded in her search and found a job in cleaning services in a small restaurant 15 minutes away from her house. Unfortunately, Betty didn't know that a job like hers would die. As for her husband, he had found a job as a security guard in Oshokoshaki, 30 minutes from his home by car. The two lived a life of tranquility, comfort and tranquility. But suddenly everything turned into a forgotten dream and things turned upside down on November 6th of the month in which Betty Rolfe found her death in a horrific way. And the way the police found her body indicates many question marks. And the most important questions are whether she really deserved the torment inflicted on her out the night. Also, what are the motives for someone to kill and maim a woman who is known to be peaceful in such a brutal way? So, what happened that day? November 6, 1988 was a difficult day for Appleton from the freezing weather as they avoid leaving their homes for fear of facing this bad weather. Although Betty is aware of what is outside of the terrible snowstorm looming over the state, she insists on going out to work, and one of her reasons was that her husband forced her to go so that her salary wouldn't decrease, as was sometimes happening, and what was from Betty except to prepare and go out. But unfortunately, she resorted to walking on foot to work because Charles apologized for delivering her. And the reason was, "My work will be late than usual." And indeed, she put on her black coat, which will protect her from facing the weather on it, and went out with determination at its time at 6 a.m. As usual, at her return time at 2 p.m., her husband waited impatiently for her at home, but unusually, it's late. The police questioned Charles' statements and actions, but didn't find anything suspicious to prove that Charles, her husband, had a hand in the crime, despite the questions and the question marks about his actions that day. Betty prepared herself with her coat and my work was late, So she went to the restaurant, which is 10 blocks away from our house, on foot. A severe storm blew in her face as she opened the door, but despite that, her determination was stronger and she went out immediately. And here was the last time someone from the ocean had glimpsed Betty alive. Betty didn't reach the restaurant and didn't reach her house as well when it was time to return home at 2 o'clock, and she didn't come. I began to feel anxious and wondered why she was late. Then I assumed that she was preparing some household supplies. And when evening came and I didn't see Betty, I reassured myself that she was probably at our son's house and caring for her grandson. But there was no way to make sure that my feeling was true, because our son didn't have a landline phone for the house. And Charles adds that he called the rest of the family, but they told him that they had never encountered her that day, and that's what made Charles come back to his anxiety. He said, "I spent the whole night imagining Betty, that she would come and solve that mystery, and then I was worried again after midnight and cried a lot when I realized that I must believe that something terrible had befallen my wife." When the next morning arrived, Charles made headway in the snow to reach the police station and reported missing his wife, Betty Rolfe. And the report was at 10:40, and at 11 a.m. Appleton police officers entered the neighborhood where Betty lives to start the search operation and quickly began to investigate from her home to the road to her work, and reached an overpass similar to a bridge for railway locomotives. And during their search, they found something suspicious. After checking, they discovered that the thing was the body of a woman covered mostly in ice and naked from waist to toe. She was in bad shape. The police officer learned that they wanted to search that found it. She was surrounded by a belt around her neck and exposed to violence. The body was taken to a Wisconsin laboratory, and forensic specialists were able to confirm that she had been wrapped, severely beaten on the head and face with a sharp object, and strangled. It took swabs from Betty's body, and these swabs contained the killer's DNA. But unfortunately, the techniques weren't advanced to help detect through DNA, and it kept these swabs in a safe place in the hope of finding the killer one day, or somehow. Also, the police didn't rest in a place and tried to search, investigate by various means, hoping to find the killer. But there was almost no evidence to suspect anyone, and the case remained surrounded by the unknown for a long time, and their enthusiasm towards solving the case has disappeared, and the glimmer of hope has been extinguished, and the issue has returned to coldness again, until the family began to feel that the right of Betty had gone to waste, and the perpetrator fled without trial, and the case was registered against an unknown person, and this was since the murder of Betty until 2001. But science has developed, and it has become possible to conduct a DNA test on the swabs kept. And here the rule of acid began to reveal the unknown at that time. The DNA profile of the killer was prepared, and the profile was entered into the nationwide CODIS database. When investigators knew that they were closer to solving the case than ever before. Indeed, after they conducted this examination, 2 men were reached. The first was called Jane Myers, and the second was only reached to the initials of his name, which was C.M. And the 2 men were brothers, the so-called CM was reached and questioned immediately, and it is mentioned that he was cooperating with them. And to confirm, they took a sample of saliva from him and sent it to the laboratory for analysis, and the result was negative. Immediately after that, they focused on the so-called Jinn and began searching for him to make sure whether he was deceased, as mentioned by CM in his statements, especially that they didn't reach a death certificate in his name. Then, after a long search, they found his niece, and immediately they interrogated her and gave them details that were very important. As she said, on November 6, 1988, my uncle called my mother to say goodbye to her because he was traveling outside Wisconsin, and after the call ended, my mother seemed troubled for a reason I didn't understand. When I asked her, she answered me that it was a secret, a dangerous secret. On the basis of these rumors, the so-called Jinn was searched insistently. Several weeks later, they found him in Washington, about an hour south of Tacoma, living a peaceful and quiet life. He owned a pickup truck, and this truck that helped solve a case and a complex puzzle. Thanks to the concerned authorities and the FBI, they took swabs from the handle of his truck to the crime laboratory in Wisconsin, and the result that had been waiting for 34 years was positive. In 2022, a 66-year-old man was charged with first-degree murder and first-degree sexual assault with a weapon on December 7, 2022. Now that an elderly woman has lived all this terrible suffering against her age and her kind heart, and this was difficult for her family members and acquaintances, is it enough for the perpetrator of this crime to be imprisoned only? Give us your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the channel to receive everything new again. Goodbye.